Lago, the chair of the Association of American Chambers of Commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean, better known as AACCLA. Last year, I was honored to be voted in for my first term as chairman of AACCLA, and today it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to our 2022 Outlook on the Americas Conference. This is AACCLA's first major hemispheric business event of the year and an important opportunity to consider both our short-term goals, promoting strong democracies and reactivating economic growth, and our long-term vision for a more integrated, inclusive, and resilient hemisphere. As some of you may know, AACCLA, along with the 23 American Chambers of Commerce across Latin America and the Caribbean, have advocated for free trade and the adherence to the rule of law for more than 50 years, which are critical for creating the conditions for economic prosperity. I provide tax and accounting counseling to various companies at my day job, where I serve as a tax partner at KPMG Panama. And like many of you, I am acutely aware of the global uncertainty that many companies are facing. As we enter 2022, it's important to take stock of where the hemisphere is going and consider the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. COVID-19 has driven an economic hardship in the region that will be tough to overcome. According to the IMF, who we'll also hear from today, for 2022, the region will grow 2.4%, far weaker than the rest of the world, and down from 6.8% growth in 2021, a rebound year for 2020, but nowhere near enough to get the region back to where it was. COVID-19 is not the only thing hitting the region. With weakened economies, rising inflation, among other factors, we've also seen debilitated democracies. With upcoming elections in critical markets, we will all have a watchful eye on the implications of several of these campaign promises. Despite this uncertainty, there is still a sense of optimism. It's at this time, as the face of the U.S. business community in the hemisphere, that the U.S. Chamber, AACCLA, and the AmChams are committed to working with governments and other partners to advance solutions. It is extremely important for the business community to work with regional governments to overcome these economic challenges, especially if we are to spur economic growth for a more integrated, inclusive, and resilient hemisphere and reduce poverty levels. Additionally, with the U.S. Hosting the upcoming Summit of the Americas, there is great optimism for a renewed and strengthened relationship with the region. Because we know that with the engagement of the private sector and the commitment of leaders across the region, we have a real opportunity to promote policies that can position the region to grow as we transition from a coronavirus pandemic to an endemic state. So we thank you, the audience, for taking part in our conversation today, where we get to learn more about important initiatives, such as the Alliance for Development in Democracy, the outlook for the regional economy, and the Biden-Harris administration economic diplomacy agenda for the Western Hemisphere in 2022. We are honored to feature speakers who will share their priorities for their respective countries and organizations and vision for the future. It is in the spirit of this mission that we enter 2022, reinvigorated by the opportunity to enhance the relationships between the US and Latin America and the Caribbean. You will find no better ally for the job than our ancients and our AACCLA Secretariat in Washington, D.C. But we cannot do any of this work without our thought partners and supporters, AACCLA's Shares Leadership Circle. So, a sincere thank you to all for your strong partnership. It's now my privilege to turn to Neil Harrington, Senior Vice President of the Americas at the U.S. Chamber. Neil leads the Chamber's hemispheric policy and business engagement through the different programs and initiatives such as AACCLA. We look forward to hearing his insights on the Chamber's hemispheric priorities for 2022.
Thank you, Luis, for that very kind introduction and for kicking off this year's Virtual Outlook on the Americas Conference. We're grateful to you for your leadership as chair of the AACCLA Governing Board, and we look forward to another great year working together in 2022. I'd like to thank all of you who represent our AACCLA Leadership Circle companies, without whose support none of these efforts would be possible. And of course, no group deserves more kudos than the great AACCLA Secretariat team. Thanks to Anne for her leadership as AACCLA EVP, Isabel for execution of AACCLA priorities, Maximiliano and Brittany for their work in preparing this program, and the rest of Team Americas for pitching in. I really appreciate the chance to be part of this conference, which, in my opinion, could not come at a more pivotal juncture when it comes to elevating the strategic importance of Latin America and the Caribbean to the U.S. Importantly for us at AACCLA, our vision and priorities for the Western Hemisphere echo many of the U.S. Chamber's broader global objectives. As we enter year 3 of the COVID-19 pandemic, we remain focused on the resilience of healthcare systems and fostering an inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. The private sector has been integral to pandemic response across the hemisphere. Companies have led in areas such as vaccine innovation, COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, and in ensuring that life-saving material is delivered to even the most remote corners of the Americas. But beyond that, regardless of your sector, I know every business leader joining today has seen his or her company respond to meet extraordinary pandemic-era needs of customers, suppliers, and many stakeholders. As we now concentrate our efforts on driving a full economic rebound, we know that creating the right conditions for trade and investment will be essential. That's why we're focused on the challenges that could potentially jeopardize recovery, such as inflation, which is top of mind for companies, consumers, and policymakers alike. As all of you know, U.S. monetary policy is already tightening, and markets expect the Federal Reserve to make multiple interest rate adjustments in 2022. As the business community, this means we have to be hyper-vigilant, given the history we know too well. As the old adage goes, when the Fed sneezes, our region too often catches a cold. Economic recovery will also depend on addressing the supply chain bottlenecks that affected so many parts of the world. The U.S. Chamber is urging new investments to modernize ports, advocate for reforms to address our workforce challenges, promote new funding for semiconductor investment, and urge broad tariff relief. As all of you know, the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation and the demand for increased connectivity. As digital technologies transform the ways that we live, learn, and work, we're focusing on ensuring a level playing field and regulatory frameworks built for future technologies. At the same time, governments are increasingly considering data governance measures that extend well beyond traditional privacy regulation. As a result, the Chamber is urging the United States to work with others to halt the proliferation of new digital trade barriers, including through the negotiation of a broad digital trade agreement. When it comes to the challenge China presents in our region and throughout the global economy, our CEO, Suzanne Clark, said it best during her State of American Business speech. There is no easy answer when it comes to China. We must compete vigorously around the world, she said. We must stand up for our values and security and against unfair trading and regulatory practices. And we must at the same time cooperate with China on critical global challenges such as sustainability and public health. Focusing on the Chamber's trade agenda in the region, we recognize that the pandemic and its effects have also reaffirmed the importance of diversified supply chains and shone a spotlight on the potential for increased trade in the Western Hemisphere writ large. As Suzanne highlighted at the State of American Business, Winning the future means winning in global markets and competing for global leadership. The U.S. has not entered into an agreement with a new trade partner in more than a decade. Inaction on the trade front not only costs export sales and domestic jobs, but it forces potential partners to turn to our global competitors to fill their trade and investment needs. We encourage the Biden administration to fully implement existing trade agreements and to pursue new, mutually beneficial trade agreements with like-minded partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. Never has this been more important as we witness China emerging as the top trading partner and source of investment for many countries across our region. In North America, trade is more essential now than ever. In 2021, the U.S. saw the highest level of goods traded with Canada and Mexico in its history. This in spite of myriad pandemic-driven challenges. That said, we must be ever vigilant in order to overcome challenges that stand to undermine progress. The Mexican government's ongoing efforts to champion a state-centric economic policy at the expense of private enterprise is such an example of a challenge that threatens the region's competitiveness. With regard to energy transition, this year will likely continue to see a divergence of climate and sustainability policies between economic haves and have-nots. That's why developed economies bear greater responsibility in addressing climate change. In other parts of the region, we continue to advocate for the long-term goal of reaching comprehensive, high-standard trade deals with partners with whom the U.S. already has trade instruments in place, such as Brazil, Uruguay, and Ecuador. Speaking of Ecuador, we applaud both governments for recently concluding the fourth official meeting of the Trade and Investment Council. The Chamber, along with AmCham Quito and AmCham Guayaquil, are appreciative of our seats at the table for this important initiative. In Brazil, we're excited to build on the recent CEO forum and move towards implementing some of the recommendations provided by the Chamber's Brazil-U.S. Business Council in collaboration with Brazil's National Confederation of Industry and AmCham Brazil. The Chamber is also focused on continuing its work addressing the root causes of migration in Central America. As many of you know, we and our AmCham partners in the subregion have been dedicated to this effort for years, dating back to the Alliance for Prosperity initiative. We see the Biden administration's efforts as the best opportunity in years to make meaningful progress in addressing regional challenges such as endemic corruption, poverty, inequality, and weak governance. We are convinced that U.S. investment in Central America has been and can be a highly effective tool for creating local jobs, growing economic prosperity, and advancing U.S. foreign policy. But investors, all of you, have choices. And enhancing investment in the subregion won't just happen in a vacuum. It will require first and foremost a commitment towards strengthening the rule of law, as well as subsequent investment to bolster infrastructure across multiple sectors, including telecommunications, transportation, energy, and healthcare. Through collaboration with the Office of the Vice President and other key partners in the White House's call to action, we believe 2022 will be the year that we collectively achieve meaningful, tangible progress in addressing the root causes of migration. Finally, as many of you know, the Biden administration recently announced the United States will host the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, California in early June. Earlier this week, the Chamber was honored to have been selected by the State Department to host the 4th CEO Summit of the Americas, the sole private sector stakeholder event to be held in conjunction with the Leaders Summit. Because this is the first U.S. hosted summit since 1994, we see it as the best opportunity the private sector has had in years to drive enhanced U.S. government commitment to the region, as well as to clearly communicate the business community's priorities to hemispheric leaders. In addition to reaffirming our role in driving regional recovery, we will be making clear the pro-growth policy we need to make that happen. You and your companies are already leading in areas critical for future hemispheric growth, such as trade, digital transformation, the green energy transition, resilient health infrastructure, diversity and inclusion, and SME empowerment. With this in mind, together we will leverage the summit to advance an action plan with the governments to unleash inclusive and sustainable growth across the region. Like everything else we do, success in this effort won't be possible without the leadership and support of all of our partners and stakeholders. So we look forward to working closely with all of you to make this summit the most successful one yet. With that, I want to again thank all of you for joining us for AACCLA's virtual outlook on the Americas conference. As Luis told you, we're fortunate to have a terrific lineup of speakers to address the critical issues of the day. So I'm excited to turn things over to my friend and colleague, AACCLA Executive Vice President, Ann McKinney. Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Neil, and good morning, everyone. We're very fortunate today to be joined by the foreign ministers of Panama, Costa Rica, and the Dominican Republic to learn more about how their governments are working together to promote a sustainable economic recovery in the region. The presidents of these three countries came together to launch the Alliance for Development and Democracy last September at the United Nations General Assembly, stating their commitment to work together to promote economic growth within the framework of democracy, human rights, and sustainable development goals. Since then, the three countries have convened two high-level meetings to address challenges facing the region and to identify a roadmap to build closer ties and work with strategic partners, including the United States, which has been invited to attend the next meeting of the Alliance for Development and Democracy, which will be held in Costa Rica next month. I'd now like to welcome our distinguished panel to start this conversation. I'm very pleased to welcome the Minister of Panama, Erika Moines, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, Rodolfo Solano Quiros, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Dominican Republic, Roberto Alvarez. Thank you all for joining us today. To help us better understand the goals of the Alliance, I'd like to invite you to begin with an introduction to the core pillars that are underlining and guiding this initiative. Minister Moines, could you please begin, help us start this conversation with a look at the political pillar? Foreign Minister Moines, I believe that you're still muted. I'm sorry, I thought our tech team was working behind the scenes to address that, but I think you need to unmute. We can't hear you yet. While we're working out some of the technical issues with Foreign Minister Moines and her team, we'll take a look and invite Minister Solano to discuss the cooperation pillar in order to continue our conversation. Minister Solano, over to you, please.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning. Thank you also, Niels and Luis, for the introductory remarks and my sincere gratitude for this opportunity. First of all, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for inviting us today to this special event, Outlook of the Americas, to share our thoughts on the Alliance for Development in Democracy. A first reflection I want to make is how we understand the historical moment of our independent life. On 2021, Costa Rica and Panama celebrated 200 years of independence, and this coming February 27th, the Dominican Republic will celebrate its 178th year of independence. Our countries are committed to a common view on the importance of strengthening democratic institutions based on values and visions we share. My dear friends, let me be clear about this important issue. Democracy, human rights, and freedom of press and expression is under attack in our region and in other places worldwide. We need to respond in a smart and very strategic way. The regional situation is a call for action to find the best partners to work together to convene joint actions that lead to prosperity, sustainable development, economic reactivation, and recovery. The Alliance is a response for that call to action. It's an informal association which aspires to promote a better communication and comprehension between our countries and strategic partners such as the United States and allows a flexible dialogue space to exchange points of view on a regular basis with the double purpose of providing mutual support and launch joint initiatives. A second reflection is that we are looking forward to work together with US authorities and the private sector, think tanks and civil society in a strong partnership to address the critical challenges in the region. As President Biden mentioned during the closing remarks on the Summit for Democracy, the creation of this alliance reflects our commitment and an inspiring partnership to cooperate in matters of transparency, human rights, economic development, and the strengthening of democracy. After the formal adoption of the alliance in New York in September 2021, and after two more summits, Costa Rica will host the fourth presidential summit of the alliance this coming March 21st, in which we will work together on the identification and prioritization of the fundamental areas of cooperation within the alliance wants to work together. For this meeting, we have also extended an invitation to the United States, and we expect to have a high-level participation to discuss together on ways to cooperate on the matters of the utmost importance for our countries and the region. A third and final reflection is regarding the cooperation pillar of the Alliance, which is being driven and coordinated by the government of Costa Rica. Our three countries have recognized the value of cooperation and are determined to increase the trilateral synergies to collaborate in lines of action for an effective post-pandemic recovery. Considering that the support of international cooperation and solidarity is fundamental to guide the goals of sustainable development, Costa Rica believes that the concept of development in transition is a current response to escape the graduation trap, to better address the profound regional challenges and build a more appropriate measurement of development of a multidimensional nature according to the needs of each country for a more effective and fair distribution of international financing resources. We want all the different sectors, both public and private, to understand and engage with this new cooperation paradigm. In this sense, Costa Rica is also leading a call to the international community and financial institutions to increase extraordinary concessional financing for economic recovery, as well as better and new resources for climate adaptation and technological and digital transformation. My dear friends, we are confident that the three members of the Alliance are reliable partners on the promotion of democracy, the defense of open societies, international law, and the paradigm of green, fair, and inclusive development towards the great structural challenges of humanity, such as the current migratory situation. I am very pleased to share with all of you the ideas that have driven the creation of this alliance and extend my personal gratitude to my dear friends and colleagues, the ministers of Panama and the Dominican Republic, and of course, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all its memberships, hoping this is just the first of many possibilities for work together. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Minister Solano. And now we'd like to return to Foreign Minister Moines Thank you for your patience. And please, we look forward to hearing from you more about the work that's being done under the political pillar of the Alliance.
Thank you. Does it work now?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your patience. Wonderful to see you, Rodolfo, Roberto, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And following along a little bit on what Rodolfo was saying, I think that it is important first, the framework, as mentioned, that why was created this alliance, why this makes sense now. We have tons of organizations or multilateral platforms. So what are we trying to accomplish? And given what is happening in the region, it made sense to try to bring like-minded proponents of democracy in our region, in Latin America, to unify those efforts to bolster democracy in particular, and to equate democracy with progress, with economic growth, to show results, and to have that as the model for other countries to follow, and not just be a wonderful speech or a discourse, but actually actions. And how can you actually create or focus that democracy supports development and contributes to not only robust, but stable economic growth, which is what we all want. And one of the key components is then international cooperation. So you help through international cooperation protect democracy and ensure prosperity and addressing all the region's pressing challenges. And we know there are many. We're all coming out of the pandemic. We're all desperately trying to establish that economic growth and recovery. We are all facing the climate change. We're all dealing with migration. We all want to have gender equality at the center of our agendas. So you have all those key components that you want to address, and unifying them together in a strategic collaboration. You have Panama, Costa Rica, and Dominican Republic creating this alliance as a very flexible mechanism, so not rigid, not trying to replace any of the various multilateral platforms that we have. But you have these three solid economies, and the unifying link among all three of them being the support for democracy, for the rule of law, for the protection of human rights, and fostering that cooperation among our countries strengthens our democratic institutions, but it also, and very important, unlocks opportunities, economic opportunities for our people in our region, and that is beyond our three countries. And as we face those a number of challenges that I was mentioning, being committed to work with the United States and other partners to show that democracy can deliver results will be key. There are several elections happening in several countries. There are also new elected governments just taking place. You want solid governments working together with the United States and other partners in that platform to develop and to foster that economic growth. And there will be several instances where we will be able, and we're already working together. And I think that just the mere fact that you don't have this rigid structure where you're appointing people and you're creating a secretariat, and then there are scheduled meetings that must happen, and a rigid system, and where it's more about the budget or who gets appointed than what the results can do for you. With the few meetings that we've had, I think it's amazing how much we've already been able to accomplish. The nature of how close our three governments are working, and in the multilateral platforms in several areas, whether it is the OAS or AACCLA, more closely, that is within the Central American region. The fact that we're working together with that key goal in mind, and that is equating democracy with results and with economic growth, seems to be not only getting praise regionally, but we heard from President Biden himself pointing this as one of the examples to follow, and how we embracing democracy particularly in this time, and what it means for the region, it's absolutely crucial. So I welcome the opportunity that we're able to discuss a little bit on the political side, why it is important to always have it next to the area for growth, for trade and for investment, which my colleague Roberto will discuss further. But the ideas together are extremely powerful message. And as we prepare for the summit in LA in just a few months, having these three solid economies with this guiding principle in terms of democracy, delivering results will be key. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Moines. And now we'll turn to Foreign Minister Roberto Alvarez, who will talk a bit more about the economic agenda, in particular nearshoring. As we've heard, a key element is showing that democracy delivers, and clearly the economic agenda will be critical to that. Minister Alvarez, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for putting together this panel. I'm going to build on what both Erika and Rodolfo have said on the reasons from a political point of view and cooperation that brought together the three countries in September of last year in New York. We are aware, and we've heard in the presentation so far, the geopolitical reasons that have led to the disruptions in supply chains. We all are aware of the main reasons, the U.S.-China rivalry, and of course, the pandemic, how COVID has disrupted supply chains. This has accelerated a process that was already underway since basically 2010, which was a regionalization of production. So we've formed this alliance within this environment. We thought that our three countries could gain greater visibility if we came together and we showed to the world how democracies can actually deliver, and how we, the three small countries with a total population of basically 20 million, have perhaps one of the higher per capita trading exchange with the United States and other countries, way above larger countries within our region. For example, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, and Panama are probably the 7th, 6th, and 12th most important trading partners of the United States, respectively, using now 2019, 2020, and 2021 figures. But if we were one country with 20 million inhabitants, we would be the U.S. third trading partner in the Americas, after Mexico and Brazil, before Chile, Colombia, Argentina, etc., with much larger populations. So this is one of the very important critical aspects that we need to sell, that we are poised to really take off and become even greater, a greater trading partner. We are also, let me just mention, we are also Canada's 5th trading partner, and I believe also the 5th of the European Union. Given our locations, our strategic locations, all three countries, we're Caribbean countries, we are within a very short delivery time of the United States, given the level of connectivity that our three countries have with the United States in terms of shipping, in terms of airline connections, our lower freight costs, our higher U.S. content. In comparison to Asian goods that are brought into the United States, which have on average a 4% U.S. content value, our region, our three countries, on an average, have 40% U.S. content on the goods that we trade. So there is a win-win for the three countries involved. We are poised to take off our already considerable trade balance and trading to even greater heights if we're able to take this to the next stage, which is the formation of the Alliance for Development and Democracy, Business and Investment Council with the United States. This is in formation. Actually, this was the agreement that was reached in December when the three presidents met here in Puerto Plata, Dominican Republic. One of the declarations that was approved was precisely the creation of this council. The private sectors of the three countries are eagerly working, feverishly working on this creation right now. And we hope that in Costa Rica, March 21st, this agreement, the formal creation of this council will be signed. Hopefully, one of the interests of the three countries is to also reach an agreement with the United States so that we have a study of our supply chains and the possibilities for growth in the future with the United States. So there are many possibilities in terms of creating a nearshoring or friendshoring fund, financial support for the diversification projects, stockpiling of critical inputs and products, new trade and customs instruments that we need to explore. There's a whole range of issues along these lines. In terms of investment, well, the three countries are already have considerable U.S. investment. We provide juridical security for those investments and incentives as well. So we hope that March 21st in San Jose, we will be able to consolidate the advances that we have made in these very short 5 months so far. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Alvarez. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're not going to be able to go through a second round of questions, but I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us today to share the goals and priorities for the Alliance for Development in Democracy. I think I'd like to use this opportunity to extend an invitation. We'd love to have you back to delve further into opportunities for partnership with the private sector. Very excited to learn more about the declaration to create the Council for Business and Investment. And I think certainly it sounds like a great time would be after this next meeting in Costa Rica to follow up on opportunities and ways the private sector can support the work of the Alliance and contribute to the shared goals in terms of strengthening a stable and robust economic recovery and advancing democracy in the region. So again, I'm sorry we don't have time to continue today's conversation, but look forward to inviting you back on another occasion. And thank you again for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to address this conference. I'm delighted to share my thoughts on the outlook and challenges facing Latin America and the Caribbean. Before that, let me start by recognizing the important role the Chamber of Commerce's Association of American Chambers of Commerce plays in the region. By promoting trade and investment between the United States and 28 Latin American Caribbean countries, the Chamber is helping support much needed growth and development in the region. As you know, the region has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of health and economic outcomes. The outlook remains challenging. I would like to focus my remarks today on 4 issues. Economies in Latin America and the Caribbean are losing steam after making a strong comeback last year. At the same time, some of the largest economies in the region are battling rising inflation. The outlook remains clouded by considerable uncertainty. And the last point is that the region will continue to face challenges in the post-pandemic world, and tackling them will require a comprehensive strategy. Let me elaborate on each of these points. First, economies in Latin America and the Caribbean are losing steam after making a strong comeback last year. The region's real GDP declined by 6.9% in 2020, but rebounded by a strong 6.8% in 2021. The recovery has been driven by favorable external factors such as robust growth in trading partner countries, higher commodity prices, and favorable external financing conditions. On the domestic front, progress on vaccinations, continued fiscal support in some countries, and the spending of accumulated savings from 2023 also helped. In 2022, we expect growth to slow to 2.4%. This is a downgrade compared to our October 2021 forecast of 3%. A slowdown in growth is inevitable as economies return to the pre-pandemic GDP levels. However, additional headwinds emerged since last October, including slower growth in trading partner countries, particularly the United States and China, continued supply disruptions, tighter monetary and financial conditions, as well as the emergence of the Omicron variant. The second point that I would like to address is some of the largest economies in the region are battling rising inflation. While some countries in the region were struggling with high inflation already before the pandemic, inflation remained in low single digits in several countries, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. But the picture changed in 2021, when prices in these 5 economies increased by 8.3% on average, the largest jump in 15 years, and higher than in other emerging markets. Why? Because a surge in food and energy prices was part of the story. Core inflation, excluding food and energy prices, rose by less, 6.3%, but still exceeded the pre-pandemic trends and outpaced core inflation in other emerging markets. Many factors have contributed to this more broad-based rise in inflation. Rising commodity and import prices, exchange rate depreciation, as well as released pent-up consumer demand and a shift in spending towards goods over services. In some countries, wage pressures and indexation practices are pushing up prices further. To contain rising inflation and to preserve hard-won credibility, large central banks in the region reacted quickly and decisively. In Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, Mexico, Peru, policy rates rose between 1.25 percentage points and 7.25 percentage points over the course of 2021. As a result, long-term inflation expectations remain relatively well anchored, but short-term inflation expectations remain elevated. While there appear to be signs of inflation moderation in some large economies in the region, suggesting that monetary policy tightening is working, is it too early to call it a victory? Central banks will have to continue to remain vigilant, and in recent weeks, some of them surprised markets with higher than expected hikes. If rising inflation threatens to the anchor inflation expectations, they will have to raise interest rates further to signal a continued commitment to inflation targets and to avoid persistent price increases. This will have to be accompanied by clear and transparent communication. The third point is that the outlook remains clouded by considerable uncertainty. Uncertainty about the evolution of the pandemic more broadly continues to cast a shadow on the recovery globally and in Latin America and the Caribbean. Inflation pressures in the United States and across the region, which may call for an even faster withdrawal of monetary accommodation, the potential change in investor risk sentiment, and associated tighter global and domestic financial conditions represents risks to the recovery. Policymakers could prepare for U.S. monetary policy tightening by extending public debt maturities, reducing fiscal rollover needs more generally, and limiting the buildup of currency mismatch on financial sector balance sheets where possible. The region will continue to face challenges in the post-pandemic world, and tackling them will require a comprehensive strategy. Public debt in Latin America and the Caribbean increased by close to 10 percentage points in 2020, leaving the region with higher debt burden on average than in other emerging markets. Many countries in Latin America and Caribbean will need to consolidate their public finance to ensure debt sustainability, but will have to do it in an inclusive manner. At the same time, the pandemic will leave scars in the forms of lost jobs, schooling, and growth more generally. In fact, the region is not expected to return to its pre-pandemic GDP trend in the near future, raising another risk of lost decade. The pandemic exacerbated pre-existing social tensions, which had built up during years of economic stagnation following the end of the commodity boom. And with a heavy election calendar looming, social unrest remains a major risk. Therefore, countries in the region must simultaneously tackle three major challenges. First, ensuring the sustainability of public finances after the exceptional spending needs during the pandemic. Second, raising potential growth after several lost decades. And third, doing the above in a manner that promotes social cohesion and addresses social inequities. You may ask yourself, is it possible to achieve all these three objectives simultaneously? It will be challenging, but my answer is yes. Policymakers in the region can and should develop a comprehensive strategy for addressing these challenges and for building societal consensus around this strategy as soon as possible. Take, for example, the third and the first objective, sustainable public finances and social cohesion. To achieve both objectives at the same time, the countries will have to pursue inclusive consolidation strategy. Consolidation of fiscal, but inclusive social priorities. What does it mean? It means that fiscal plans have to prioritize social spending, that is, spending on education, on health, and social assistance within a constrained fiscal envelope. This might require scaling down other non-essential or inefficient spending. This may also require taking a careful look at the tax system with the view of correcting the current design flaws that could help generate additional revenue while making the tax system more progressive as more growth-friendly. Consolidations designed with social objectives in mind are likely to be more successful and durable. Policymakers and the private sector have to work together to achieve such consolidations, which will eventually benefit the whole society. Also, when you look at the second and third objective, potential growth and social cohesion, there is even a clearer nexus. Rising potential growth will require investing in both physical and capital, as well as raising productivity growth. These objectives could be achieved, at least in part, by strengthening equality of opportunities for households and firms. This means ensuring broad access to education and health, as well as to affordable finance. In regard to the later, affordable finance, I see new financial technologies as playing a particularly important role. They allow better access to banking and broader financial services and give governments new ways to reach those who need support. Just look at the past few years in which digital finance has helped households and businesses meet the challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic. While there has been impressive progress in using financial technologies for bolstering financial inclusion and supporting more broadly, more needs to be done, and private sector innovation in this area will remain key going forward. At the same time, policymakers will have to play their part by adopting enabling policies which help spur digital innovation and reap its benefit for financial inclusion while mitigating the risk to financial stability and protecting consumer rights. These policies include building inclusive digital infrastructures, including common standards supporting consumer choices and bolstering competition, updating competition policies to adapt them to new and more forward-thinking ways, and strengthening data privacy to give more control to a variety of users. To conclude, as you can see, addressing challenges will require bold policy action, but will also require a cooperation from the private sector. I hope you can help countries in Latin America and the Caribbean take the unique opportunity and build forward after the pandemic toward a more prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive region. I believe that continued trade and financial cooperation between the US and countries in the region will be mutually beneficial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goldfan. We appreciated your outlook for the region's economic recovery, as well as the policy priorities that you identified in terms of the sustainability of public finances, the potential for growth, and driving forward both of the above with social cohesion and social equity, as well as the important role that the private sector can play through increased trade and investment. And with that, I'm very pleased to now welcome the Honorable Marisa Lago, Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Undersecretary Lago was appointed by President Biden and sworn in December, and has had a distinguished career in public service with expertise in international markets, trade, financial regulation, and enforcement. The Chamber and our member AmChams enjoy a strong partnership with the Department of Commerce and its International Trade Administration, and we look forward to working with Undersecretary Lago. And now I'd like to turn to her for a look at the Biden administration's economic diplomacy priorities in the Western Hemisphere.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Anne. It's always good to be working with a Commerce Department alum. I'm grateful to AACCLA and Chair Laguerre for inviting me to your conference, and I'm also grateful to the attendees from 23 AmChams for your continued engagement. Together, you represent over 20,000 companies and 80% of US dollars invested in Latin America and the Caribbean. Your organizations are vital partners who live at that intersection of the public and private sectors. I'm delighted to deliver my very first public remarks as Undersecretary at Outlook on the Americas, because commerce within our own hemisphere is so vital to the US economy, our businesses, and our workers. How vital? The US is the top trading partner for over 2/3 of the region's nations. The International Trade Association, ITA, is fully engaged in the region on behalf of US businesses and workers, most especially through the crucial and constant work of our Foreign Commercial Service. They're present in 23 offices across 14 markets in the region. In recent years, we've experienced both new and recurring obstacles to doing business in Latin America and the Caribe. The pandemic exacted a devastating human toll and sparked the deepest recession in the region's history. During this time, trade dropped by over a fifth. While last year's return to growth offered some relief, the pandemic continues to be a drag on our economies, with the burden falling hardest, sadly though not surprisingly, on underserved and marginalized communities. The pandemic also derailed a regional wave of mass protests, some of which had been quelled violently, that had roiled the region since late 2019. The momentum of those civil actions stalled, but let's not kid ourselves. Long-held outrage against social injustice, corruption, and inequality of opportunity remains. After 3 decades of broadly expanding freedoms and growth, the region faces a difficult path forward with faltering economies, weakening rule of law, and citizens losing faith in democracy, conditions that drive migration, which further destabilizes the region. Reversing these trends and building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future in the Americas is a Biden-Harris administration priority that guides our work at ITA. ITA is deeply committed to building a more prosperous and inclusive economy through strengthening the competitiveness of US businesses and workers, by promoting trade and investment, and by ensuring fair trade practices. Within our hemisphere, 3 key pillars shape our pursuit of these priorities: competitiveness, transparency, and security. And I'll address each of them. Competitiveness is at the core of our economic agenda. The administration is driving crucial investments at home that allow us to compete and win abroad. But strengthening competitiveness also means assuring fair and open markets and expanding export opportunities. For US businesses and workers to compete on a level playing field, they need fair and consistent rules. This foundation already exists in part of the region. In fact, most of the nations with which the United States has free trade agreements are in our hemisphere. Still, we need to do more for US businesses, including combating trade barriers, bolstering intellectual property protections, and promoting predictable legal and regulatory structures. Achieving robust trade policy commitments is important, but we also must expand export lanes. This starts with growing our pool of exporters, especially small businesses, which account for 98% of identified US exporters and who support some 4 million jobs. Walk through the business district in any US town or city, and chances are that you'll see a small business that's achieving growth through exports, not to mention creating more jobs and paying higher wages than their non-exporting peers. To ensure that the benefits of exporting reach more broadly, last year ITA launched GDEI, the Global Diversity Export Initiative, which aims to promote international opportunities and trade resources to underserved community. Our US field team is undertaking intensive outreach, including recruiting for the first GDEI trade mission in May, and also collaborating with WELTI. That's the acronym for Women Empowered Leave Legacies Through Trade and Investment. WELTI will be participating in activities at the Department of Commerce's signature Trade Winds Conference at Dubai next month. I look forward to participating personally in Dubai on the ground and hope to see many of your companies represented there. ITA is also committed to developing new export opportunities that support the Biden-Harris administration's priorities. We're working to develop and implement a clean technologies export competitiveness strategy to combat climate change globally while creating good-paying jobs at home. We're also expanding U.S. companies' infrastructure procurement opportunities through Build Back Better World, or to those in the know, B3W, which seeks to address infrastructure needs in the developing world in a manner that's consistent with our values. ITA is excited to pursue these high standards projects across 4 vital work streams: climate, digital connectivity, health and health security, and gender equality. One key focus of B3W is transparency, which distinguishes it from the opaque conditions in which predatory competitors seek unfair advantage. Transparency in access, procurement, and regulation is also a broader regional priority of ours. It ensures that markets are attractive not just for their export potential, but also good places in which to do business. Without transparency, corruption can fester, distorting markets and raising the cost of doing business, adding as much as 25% to public procurement costs. A $4 billion bridge becomes a $5 billion bridge, and nobody benefits except for the corrupt. As I saw time and again when I led the International Development Assistance portfolio at the Treasury Department, corruption deters investment and reduces opportunity for local and U.S. shareholders alike. That's why we're working to improve transparency through harmonizing regulatory practices, simplifying the trade facilitation process, and promoting sector-based ethics frameworks, among other efforts. Now, in addition to competition and transparency, the third pillar of our engagement in our hemisphere is security. At ITA, our efforts focus on ensuring economic security, but we also support broader foreign policy and national security goals. They are intertwined. We're working with partners across the U.S. government to sharpen tools spanning a range of threats and a range of industries, from cyber to climate to investment screening to critical minerals. Today, I want to briefly highlight a topic that is on the mind of so many globally: supply chains. As business leaders who depend on international trade, you understand the importance of resilient supply chains to our prosperity and to our security. Pandemic disruptions exposed pre-existing vulnerabilities and made clear the need for focused government action to improve transparency and coordination. Over the past year, the Biden-Harris administration has led global efforts to enhance transparency and coordination, including in Latin America and the Caribbean. We're prioritizing critical sectors in partnership with industry, labor, and civil society stakeholders. Later this year, Secretary Raimondo and Secretary Blinken will be co-hosting a supply chain ministerial forum to expand cooperation with partner nations. We're also looking forward to the United States hosting the Summit of the Americas this coming June, seeking to build a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future with our closest neighbors. The 3 pillars that shape our approach to the region, competitiveness, transparency, and security, will also guide our engagement at this summit. And ITA is already working across the U.S. government to elevate trade priorities for the summit. As we approach the Summit of the Americas and also looking beyond, We will continue to work to boost competitiveness, facilitate trade and investment, and enforce fair trade practices. We look forward to working closely together with you and your members to address obstacles to trade and to ensure that the benefits of commerce are more broadly shared in the United States and throughout the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Lago. It's an honor to hear your remarks on the Biden administration's engagement in the Western Hemisphere in 2022. On behalf of AACCLA, thank you for participating in AACCLA's 2022 Outlook on the Americas conference. We thank our distinguished speakers for bringing their vision and strategic perspectives on the region. Today, we gained insights into a wide range of issues, including the U.S. Chamber's hemispheric priorities for 2022, the Alliance for Development in Democracy, the economic outlook of the region, and the United States economic diplomacy agenda for the Western Hemisphere. We look forward to working with all of you to build a more favorable environment for trade and investment and reactivate economic growth. This year, AACCLA will continue to serve as a platform and resource in advancing an agenda of free trade, innovation, regulatory certainty, and respect for the rule of law. As always, we invite you to stay actively engaged in the AACCLA network and our program of work. With that, thank you again for your participation in the AACCLA 2022 Outlook of the Americas.